So Diane, thanks for joining us. So I think, maybe the place to start is you've really been kind of studying, entrepreneurship and innovation for much of your career. So maybe, better understanding, what do we actually mean when we're talking about entrepreneurial talent? How do you and maybe companies think about what this means?
No, thanks, Brad. I'm really happy to be here. So, that's it's an important question, and there are really two different ways to think about this. We can think about being entrepreneurial as a characteristic of a person, like a trait, something that's innate to the person, almost like a personality characteristic. Or we could think about being entrepreneurial as a kind of experience that you've had. So you've held a job in an entrepreneurial company, or you've tried to start something. And so these are two really different approaches to thinking about what does it mean to be entrepreneurial? Is it a personality trait, or is it a career experience? It's really the disciplinary divide that we see in our field, in our HR field. Psychologists tend to think about this as a characteristic of individuals, whereas sociologists tend to think about this as an experience or something that you accumulate or you accrue over time. And again, like I'm sure as you're listening to me talk, you're hearing this is kind of the old nature versus nurture debate, which we can't settle, which we've never been able to settle. And of course, there's truth to both, but depending on where you start, what your assumptions are, you actually head down very different paths. If you believe this is a characteristic of a person, you're searching for that needle in the haystack, that particular, special person who's really got the entrepreneurial drive, versus if you think this is something that people pass through, an experience they get, you could either imagine trying to create that for someone so they get that kind of experience, or you'd look in very different places with very different approaches depending on how you viewed it. And I also I want to even further complicate this. Well, I should probably reflect my bias. So I'm a sociologist by training, as you know, Brad, a psychologist. So we have these kind of discussions a lot. I tend to lean on the more career, like you could learn to be entrepreneurial. You can have entrepreneurial experiences that will shape who you are and what your attitudes are. And so I should kind of confess that right up front. I also want to think about entrepreneurial talent, right? Sometimes we're talking about the inventors, the creative geniuses of the world, the people who really are those, those quirky people who see things differently. And there's some evidence that there is a kind of almost like a genius gene. And there's been some interesting work that has identified that. Melissa Schilling, for example, has a recent book. She's an NYU faculty member that's called Quirky, where she does case study bios of some of the most famous and prolific entrepreneurs. And she kind of draws a thread that they seem to be wired differently than the rest of us. And so these kind of genius inventors, that's one category. That tends not to be what corporations want or need or are looking for, right? We can think about the entrepreneurial talent. We can think about the people who start companies, they found companies, they grow businesses, they commercialize things. That's one way of being entrepreneurial. We can also think about the people who are, they're ready to sign on, they're ready to do the heavy lifting. They're not going to start it themselves, but they're happy to join in and participate. And so this idea of, are you a founder versus are you a joiner versus are you an inventor? Those are really different things. And so for me, I think in this conversation, the first advice I'd give, or the first thing I think everyone needs to do, is be clear about when you say you need some entrepreneurial talent. What is it that you need or that you're looking for?